Hi, boys and girls. In today's lesson, our learning target is we can create a bar graph and interpret data. So I'm going to do this in two separate videos. We'll do the first page of problem set 4 in this video, and then I'll do a follow-up video for the second page in problem set 4. So let's read the directions together. The chart below shows the number of magazines sold by each student. So when I look at this, I see the student names here. And I see the number of magazines sold, a lot of magazines, 300, 250, 100, 450, and 600. The directions say use the chart to draw a bar graph below, create an appropriate scale for the graph. So I see my title here, number of magazines sold by third grade students. Okay. Here's my scale, but you can see it's missing the numbers, and that's up to us to decide a scale. This will be for the magazines sold, and that is, remember, the y-axis. Down here is the x-axis, and on the x-axis, sorry, let me redo that. On the x-axis, we are going to put the student names, okay? So let's do that first because that's the easy part. I'm gonna put the names down just as they appear in the chart. So the first name would be, let's see, first name is Ben. And then we would have Rachel. Skip a few spaces and have Jeff. And then I'm going to skip a whole bunch of spaces. Well, I guess I have room. I'm just afraid there wouldn't be room to write it. Stanley. You're going to have to write small on your paper, boys and girls. And then a few more spaces. We got Debbie. All right. Okay, so we have our 5 students going across the bottom on our x-axis. Now we have to determine an appropriate scale for the graph. So in order to do that, I'm going to look and see what numbers do I have to put in my bar graph. I've got to put 300, 250, 100, 450, and 600. It's important to know what my biggest number is going to be. So my biggest number that I'm going to have to chart will be 600. All right. And if I come down here and I look at these little hash marks they've given me, I can count these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That makes me think maybe the top one could be 600 and I could count these off as hundreds. Let's look at some of the other numbers I'm going to have to graph. Okay. I'm going to have to graph 300, 250. Well, if all of my hash marks represent hundreds, how would I represent 250? 250 is halfway between 200 and 300, so 250 would be halfway between those two numbers on my scale. So I think that this is going to work. All right, next, we're going to go ahead and put those numbers in. Remember, we're going to count by hundreds. The corner down here is 0. All right, and we want to start with 100 at the first hash mark. So I'm going to put 100 here, and I hope you can see that okay. Above it, we'll put 200. We're skip counting by hundreds. The next one will be 300. The next one will be 400. That over a little bit. The next one will be 500. And the last one up here is 600. All right, now I feel confident that even my largest number will fit on this graph, right? So we're going to start with Ben. And remember, it's a bar graph, so it's not a pictograph. We will be drawing bars. Ben sold 300 magazines. So I'm going to draw a bar that goes up to 300. All right, so that's pretty easy. I'm going to put it above Ben and have it stop at 300. And there's my bar for Ben. You can go ahead and do that. Now, Rachel is a little bit more tricky. She sold 250. So 250 is not 200 and it's not 300. It will be halfway between 200 and 300. So I'm going to kind of trace a line. Let's see if I can make a really skinny line here. Okay, 250. It's going to be right about here. I'm going to kind of trace that over. And that's about where I want to make Rachel's bar go up to. So you notice I used the scale in order to do that. Rachel sold 250, so I'm going to go ahead and make my bar for that. Now I got a skinnier bar too, but that's okay. Jeff sold 100, so that's pretty easy. I can trace my number, right line over from 100, so it's going to be right about here. So I'm going to make my square for him, go up to 100. Okay, Stanley sold 450. So again, I'm going to use my scale, and it's not 400, it's not 500, it's going to be halfway between. So I'm going to draw my little line over here, halfway between 400 and 500, and that's where I'll draw my bar for Stanley. Okay, and then last but not least, Debbie is 600. The highest number, so I'm going to draw my little line here. So I have an idea where to draw it, and it's going to go up to that line. So I'll draw my bar up there. There, and now I've got my bar graph all done. Now after, whoops, sorry guys, that kind of came undone. So I'm going to do that again. And I was not happy with the way that ended up. Here, that looks like 600 better. Okay, now it says explain how you chose the scale for the graph. So remember what we did. First thing we did was we looked at the highest number and we decided it was 600. So we needed it to go to 600. Then we looked at some of the other numbers. And so we can say we chose to count by hundreds because all of our numbers, I'm going to extend this a little bit here, were either hundreds or halfway between. And we can also say, there were 6 hash marks and our largest number was 600. So I don't know if you can see that. Here we go. So that's how we chose the scale. Always important, if you are left to choosing the scale, that you look at the data that you're going to have to put in your graph and see what scale would make sense. All right, now let's come down here. It says, how many fewer magazines did Debbie sell than Ben and Stanley combined? So I like to organize my data by putting the numbers underneath. So first I have to figure out how much Debbie sold. If I go up to the graph, that's 600, so I'm going to write it underneath Debbie's name. If I go up, again, I can get my information also right out of the table. Ben sold 300, so I'm going to write 300 underneath his name. And then Stanley sold 450. I'll write 450 underneath his name. So wants Ben and Stanley's to be combined. So if I look at this, it says Ben and Stanley combined. How do I combine them? Combine means to put together, so it's part whole, so I would add them. So I'm going to write a number sentence to add Ben and Stanley's. So it'd be 300, which represents Ben, plus 450, which represents Stanley. And you can think about that. Can you do that mentally? That's right, it's 750 for Ben and Stanley. All right, but then we have to see how many fewer magazines Debbie sold than the two of them combined. Well, Debbie sold 600. They sold 750 altogether. So we can write another number sentence here. And we're going to start with our bigger number. Our bigger number was 750. And we're going to subtract what Debbie sold, which was 600. And again, you can do this mentally. I'll give you a minute for that. If it's too hard for you to do it mentally, you can use the algorithm. Show your work. Okay, very good. 750 minus 600 is 150. So 150 fewer magazines. Okay, and where did we get these, the numbers for our target sentence? We got them, boys and girls, right from here, the question, how many fewer magazines? You can see it's 700 minus 600 equals 150 fewer magazines. All right, our last question reads, how many more magazines did Debbie and Jeff sell than Ben and Rachel? So I'm going to put Debbie and Jeff together, and then I'm going to put Ben and Rachel together. So again, to organize my work, my thoughts, I'm going to write the number of magazines they sold underneath their name. So Debbie sold 600 and Jeff sold 100. Ben, if I go back up to the chart, I can see that he sold 300 and Rachel sold 250. So I'm going to have to write two number sentences for this. I'm going to have to add 600 plus 700. So you know what I'm going to do? I can do that mentally. So I'm going to kind of do a little number bond here. 600 plus 100. I'll combine that into a part whole. So 600 plus 100 gives me 700. And that represents Debbie and Jeff. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here. I have to combine Ben and Rachel. So another part whole number bond. And again, I think I can do these mentally. 300 plus 250. That gives me 550. Now I've done a lot of work here. I've done two addition problems, but now I have to figure out how many more magazines Debbie and Jeff sold than Ben and Rachel. Well, 700 represents what Debbie and Jeff sold. 550 represents what Ben and Rachel sold. So I can write a number sentence to find out how many more Debbie and Jeff sold than Ben and Rachel. And I can take 700, which represents Debbie and Jeff, and I can subtract 550, which represents Ben and Rachel. And you can do the algorithm for that anywhere you want on the page. I'm going to put mine over here, 700 minus 550. You can do that mentally, if it makes sense, by adding on. But if you want to do the algorithm, we can do that here. Subtract the ones, 0 minus 0 is 0. Subtract the tens. You can't take 5 tens from 0 tens, so you must regroup. 700s become 600s. Good news is we now have 10 tens. 10 tens minus 5 tens gives us 5 tens. And last but not least, we subtract the hundreds. 600s minus 500s equals 100. So our answer over here is 700 minus 550 equals 150 more magazines. All right, boys and girls, there is your first page from problem set 4. If you need to watch the second video to help you complete page 2.